In the standard narrative of urban development, cities expand as populations grow. Infrastructure follows demand. Roads widen when traffic increases. Water systems scale up when neighborhoods fill. The timeline is straightforward. People arrive, then cities respond. But between 1820 and 1880, something different happened. Across the United States and Britain, major cities installed infrastructure systems capable of serving populations 2 to 3 times larger than census records show ever lived there. Philadelphia's 1850 water network could supply 650,000 residents. The city's population that year was 121,000. Boston's 1848 sewer grid was designed for municipal loads that wouldn't materialize until the 1920s. London's 1865 Thames embankment included underground railway capacity, sewage interception, and pedestrian infrastructure scaled for a metropolis of 8 million. The city held 4 million at the time. The pattern repeats. The timing raises questions. This documentary examines metropolitan infrastructure built before the populations it served existed in official records. The investigation draws on engineering archives, census data, and municipal construction logs. It presents observations, not conclusions. Multiple interpretations exist. The evidence invites examination. We begin with water. In 1842, New York City completed the Croton Aqueduct. The system delivered 90 million gallons of fresh water daily through 41 miles of brick-lined tunnels and iron pipes. Engineering journals from the period noted the system's capacity. It could serve a city of 1 million. New York's population in 1842 was 312,000. City planners justified the scale by projecting future growth. But the projections assumed expansion rates that had never occurred in American urban history. The aqueduct's designer, John B. Jervis, specified conduit dimensions, reservoir volumes, and distribution networks based on demand models that wouldn't be reached for 6 decades. The infrastructure arrived first. The population followed, eventually. Philadelphia's Fairmount Water Works followed a similar pattern. Completed in 1815 and expanded in 1822, the facility pumped water through a distribution network serving 400,000 theoretical residents. The city's actual population hovered around 64,000. The system included reservoir capacity, filtration mechanisms, and pressure regulation designed for densities Philadelphia wouldn't achieve until after the Civil War. Chicago's water intake tunnel, completed in 1867, extended 2 miles into Lake Michigan. The tunnel's diameter and pumping stations were engineered for a city of 800,000. Chicago's population that year was 298,000. The tunnel's construction predated the Great Chicago Fire by 4 years, meaning the system was designed and built during a period when the city's wooden architecture dominated and future growth remained speculative. The pattern isn't limited to water. Gas lighting networks appeared in American and British cities during the 1820s and 1830s with infrastructure capacities that exceeded immediate need by factors of 3 to 5. Baltimore's 1816 gas works included piping networks, storage facilities, and distribution grids scaled for a city twice its size. The system's technical specifications, pipe diameter, pressure regulation, meter capacity, reflected engineering for populations that didn't exist in city directories. Boston's gas infrastructure, installed between 1822 and 1828, followed the same logic. The network's design anticipated demand loads that wouldn't materialize until the 1870s. The question isn't whether the systems worked. They did. The question is why they were built so large so early. Across the Atlantic, the same phenomenon unfolded. London's Metropolitan Board of Works, established in 1855, immediately began constructing sewer systems with capacity far beyond the city's immediate needs. Joseph Bazalgette's northern and southern outfall sewers, completed between 1858 and 1865, were designed to handle waste from a population of 6 million. London's population in 1860 was approximately 2.8 million. Bazalgette himself wrote that the sewers were built with a view to the probable increase of the population. But the scale of over-engineering suggests something beyond cautious planning. The brick tunnel dimensions, the pumping station capacities, the outfall locations, all reflected a metropolitan model that existed in blueprint form before it existed in census data. Manchester's sewer network, completed in stages between 1846 and 1870, demonstrated identical overscaling. The system's engineering specifications assumed population densities that Manchester wouldn't reach until the turn of the century. The tunnels were too large. The pumping stations too powerful. The outfall systems too robust. The infrastructure anticipated a city that hadn't yet arrived. Railway terminals present another layer. Grand Central Depot in New York, opened in 1871, included 12 platforms and capacity for 15 million passengers annually. The city's actual rail traffic that year totaled approximately 4 million passengers. The terminal's design incorporated expansion infrastructure, hidden platforms and used track beds, pre-installed switching mechanisms that wouldn't be activated for decades. London Street Pancras Station, completed in 1868, was built with similar overcapacity. The train shed's single-span roof covered an area large enough to accommodate rail traffic 3 times the station's opening year volume. The platforms, storage facilities, and passenger circulation systems were engineered for a London that existed only in speculative projections. The same pattern appears in Birmingham, Liverpool, and Glasgow. Terminals built in the 1850s and 1860s with capacities that wouldn't be utilized until the 1890s or later. The question persists, why build so much so soon? One explanation suggests ambitious urban planning. City officials and engineers, aware of industrial growth patterns, simply prepared for inevitable expansion. They built infrastructure with long time horizons, accepting temporary overcapacity as the price of avoiding future bottlenecks. But the consistency across cities, across nations, across decades suggests something more systematic. The infrastructure didn't just precede demand by months or years. It preceded demand by generations. And it did so with technical precision that implied knowledge of future population distributions, density patterns, and service loads that shouldn't have been predictable with 19th-century demographic tools. The timing raises questions. The scale compounds them. The pattern deepens when examined through transportation networks that appeared before the economic conditions to justify them existed. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, stretched 363 miles from Albany to Buffalo. The canal's width, depth, and lock system were engineered to move cargo volumes that contemporary trade records show didn't exist. In 1825, New York State's western agricultural output couldn't fill the canal's capacity. The infrastructure was ready. The freight would come later. Canal engineers designed the system with 83 locks, each capable of lifting boats carrying 30 tons. The total system capacity exceeded regional cargo generation by a factor of 4. Trade journals from the period noted the discrepancy. The canal could move 200,000 tons annually. Actual freight in 1826 totaled 48,000 tons. Within 2 decades, the canal operated at full capacity. The question isn't whether the investment proved sound. It did. The question is how planners knew to build at that scale when no precedent existed. Britain's canal network followed identical logic. The Manchester Ship Canal, proposed in 1825 and completed in segments through 1894, included infrastructure specifications that anticipated industrial shipping volumes the region's factories weren't yet producing. The canal's width, depth, and lock dimensions reflected cargo projections that wouldn't materialize for half a century. The Caledonian Canal in Scotland, finished in 1822, could accommodate vessels far larger than Scottish shipping fleets operated. The canal's 60-foot width and 15-foot depth were designed for maritime traffic patterns that didn't emerge until steam shipping became standard decades later. The infrastructure preceded the industry it served. Railway networks amplified the pattern. Between 1840 and 1870, the United States built 53,000 miles of railroad track. Engineering records show the rails, bridges, and stations were constructed with load capacities, platform dimensions, and switching mechanisms scaled for traffic volumes that wouldn't exist until the 1890s. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, America's first common carrier, opened in 1830 with track infrastructure rated for locomotives and cargo loads that weren't in commercial production. The rails were over-engineered. The bridges carried safety margins beyond contemporary standards. The stations included and used platforms and dormant sidings. The infrastructure waited. Britain's railway expansion mirrored this precisely. The Great Western Railway, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel and opened in stages between 1838 and 1841, used broad-gauge track, 7 feet wide instead of the standard 4 feet 5 inches. Brunel's justification centered on future capacity. The wider gauge could handle faster, heavier trains that didn't exist in 1838. The infrastructure anticipated technological advances that hadn't occurred. Across the Midlands and North, British rail networks installed signaling systems, switching stations, and marshalling yards with capacities far beyond opening day traffic. The Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway, operational by 1847, included freight facilities designed for industrial cargo volumes the region's mills and factories weren't yet producing at scale. The coordination suggests systematic planning. Urban transit systems demonstrated the same phenomenon. London's Metropolitan Railway, the world's first underground passenger railway, opened in 1863. The tunnels, stations, and rolling stock capacity were engineered for 30 million passengers annually. Actual ridership in 1863 totaled 9.5 million. The tunnels were wider than necessary. The stations longer than traffic required. The ventilation systems more robust than contemporary air quality demanded. New York's first elevated railway, operational in 1868, included structural supports, platform lengths, and passenger circulation systems scaled for ridership that wouldn't appear until the 1880s. The infrastructure preceded the commuter patterns it served. Storage and distribution facilities followed identical principles. Grain elevators in Buffalo, Chicago, and Milwaukee, constructed between 1840 and 1870, included storage volumes that regional agricultural output couldn't fill. Buffalo's 1843 elevators could store 800,000 bushels. Regional wheat production that year totaled 340,000 bushels. The infrastructure waited for the harvest to grow. Chicago's Union Stockyards, opened in 1865, covered 345 acres with holding pens, processing facilities, and rail connections designed for livestock volumes the Midwest wasn't yet shipping. The yards could process 21,000 cattle daily. Opening year traffic averaged 6,000. Liverpool's Albert Dock, completed in 1846, included warehouse capacity and berth space for cargo volumes that British maritime trade wouldn't generate for 2 decades. The dock's design incorporated loading mechanisms, storage systems, and security infrastructure scaled for an empire's worth of goods. The docks were ready before the ships were full. Municipal fire and police infrastructure displayed the same over-engineering. Boston's fire alarm telegraph system, installed in 1852, included call boxes, signal routing, and response coordination mechanisms designed for a city twice its size. The system's technical specifications, wire gauge, signal capacity, station coverage, reflected urban density Boston wouldn't achieve until the 1880s. Philadelphia's police telegraph network, operational by 1850, could coordinate communication across precincts and districts that didn't exist. The system included and used call boxes, dormant signal lines, and station infrastructure built for administrative divisions the city hadn't yet created. The administrative framework preceded the administration. London's Metropolitan Police, established in 1829, operated from station houses with holding cells, administrative offices, and patrol coordination facilities scaled for a constabulary 3 times its initial size. The infrastructure anticipated organizational expansion that would take 40 years to materialize. The pattern extends to street lighting and paving. American cities between 1820 and 1860 installed gas lighting networks with lamp density, gas pressure, and distribution capacity far beyond what nighttime safety required. Baltimore's 1820s grid included lamp posts on streets with minimal evening traffic and residential blocks that were sparsely populated. The lights were ready for neighborhoods that hadn't filled. London's street lighting expansion in the 1840s and 1850s followed the same logic. Gas mains, lamp posts, and service infrastructure extended into areas where population density didn't justify the investment. The lighting preceded the people. Paving projects demonstrated identical over-preparation. New York street paving program, accelerated in the 1850s, covered roads with granite blocks rated for traffic loads the city's horse-drawn vehicles couldn't generate. The pavement was over-engineered. The drainage systems more robust than rainfall patterns required. The curbing stronger than necessary. The infrastructure anticipated pressure it wasn't yet experiencing. Whether this reflects inheritance, convergence, or coordinated planning remains open to interpretation. But the consistency across systems, across regions, across decades compounds the central observation. The infrastructure came first. The population followed. The word Tartaria, appears in European cartography as early as the 13th century. Medieval and Renaissance maps labeled vast territories across Central Asia as Tartary or Grand Tartary, a geographic designation for regions inhabited by Turkic and Mongolic peoples. The term derived from Tatar, itself a corruption of ethnic group names encountered during the Mongol expansion. By the 18th century, Tartaria appeared on maps as an administrative placeholder for territories European cartographers couldn't precisely delineate. Encyclopedias from the 1700s described Tartary as a region, not a unified empire. The label was geographic, not political. In modern reinterpretation, Tartaria has become something different. It's used as shorthand for a hypothesis that 19th century infrastructure in American and European cities represents inherited systems from a predecessor civilization or reorganized society whose scale and sophistication official records don't fully capture. The hypothesis takes several forms. One interpretation suggests that cities like London, New York, and Philadelphia were rebuilt or reorganized following catastrophic events, floods, fires, or social collapse, using existing infrastructure foundations. The overscaled systems weren't built ahead of demand. They were adapted from earlier configurations designed for different populations or purposes. This model points to the rapid reconstruction following events like London's 1666 Great Fire or the widespread fires that swept American cities in the early 1800s. The infrastructure that emerged afterward, proponents argue, reflected rebuilding atop older frameworks rather than new construction from demographic projections. Another interpretation centers on administrative inheritance. It suggests that municipal systems in the United States and Britain followed templates established during earlier colonial or imperial reorganizations. The over-engineering wasn't speculative. It was standardized, infrastructure built to imperial specifications regardless of immediate local need. This model emphasizes the architectural and engineering similarities across cities. The consistent tunnel dimensions, the parallel sewer designs, the uniform railway gauges, all suggest centralized planning authorities working from common blueprints. A third interpretation returns to conventional history but emphasizes the role of capital flows and speculative investment. It argues that infrastructure overcapacity resulted from financial bubbles, railroad manias, and canal speculation that drove construction beyond rational economic demand. The systems were large because investors expected returns that required growth, not because planners knew growth would occur. This model points to the canal boom of the 1820s, the railway mania of the 1840s, and the municipal bond markets of the 1850s and 1860s. Infrastructure was built with borrowed money on speculative timelines. Each interpretation addresses the same evidence. None can be definitively proven from the infrastructure alone. The year 1816 remains significant in these discussions. That year, known as the Year Without a Summer, saw widespread crop failures across Europe and North America following the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. Temperatures dropped. Harvests failed. Migration patterns shifted. Population centers experienced disruption. Some interpretations suggest 1816 marks a reorganization point, a moment when cities, faced with displacement and reconstruction needs, implemented infrastructure systems that appear overscaled in retrospect but made sense within disrupted demographic conditions. Census records from 1820 onward show population distributions that may reflect post-1816 settlement patterns rather than continuous growth from earlier periods. The infrastructure built in the 1820s and 1830s, in this view, wasn't anticipating future growth. It was accommodating recent redistribution. But municipal construction records tell a different story. Engineering archives show planning documents, cost estimates, and design specifications that reference future projections, not past populations. The language is speculative, not restorative. The evidence pulls in multiple directions. Tartaria, in its modern usage, functions less as a historical claim and more as a metaphorical framework. It's a label for the unresolved questions embedded in 19th century infrastructure. The term captures the dissonance between recorded population and engineered capacity, between official timelines and physical scale. Whether the systems represent inheritance, standardization, speculation, or simply ambitious planning, the infrastructure remains. The tunnels are still too large. The network still too comprehensive. The coordination still too systematic. London's sewers still carry capacities they didn't need in 1865. New York's aqueducts still deliver volumes the city didn't require in 1842. Chicago's rail yards still occupy spaces larger than traffic demanded in 1867. The infrastructure endures as physical evidence of something, Whether that something is foresight, inheritance, reorganization, or capital excess remains contested. The evidence invites examination without requiring consensus. What's undeniable is the consistency. From water systems to railways, from gas networks to police infrastructure, American and British cities between 1820 and 1880 built systems scaled for populations that didn't exist in contemporary records. The infrastructure preceded the demand by decades. Whether this reflects the careful planning of visionary engineers, the remnants of reorganized cities, the standardization of imperial templates, or the overreach of speculative capital, the pattern remains. The infrastructure came first. The cities that filled them came later. And the questions embedded in that sequence remain unresolved. The tunnels don't explain themselves. The capacity doesn't justify itself. The timing doesn't resolve itself. The evidence sits in municipal archives and engineering journals and census ledgers. It's accessible, measurable, undeniable. What it means, why so many cities built so much so soon, remains open. The infrastructure waits in the ground, silent, functional, overscaled. It worked then. It works now. But the question of why it was built the way it was, at the scale it was, during the years it was, continues to invite investigation. The pattern is there. The interpretation remains yours.